So, as part of our ongoing discussion on Music Ally about the payment of artists, I'm thrilled to talk to two more notable artists who are also activists for change in how artists and songwriters are paid, Zoë Keating and David Lowery. For nearly a decade, cellist and composer Zoë has been opening up the discussion of how artists get paid by streaming platforms and regularly releases her streaming data, including how much she's paid. Singer and songwriter, educator and activist David has been an outspoken critic of the royalties paid by streaming platforms for a long time and has famously settled a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit with Spotify over copyright infringement. Welcome, Zoë and David. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Fabulous. More fabulous to see the two of you. So
thank you
for joining us. Now, what we want to talk about in this conversation are constructive next steps for getting more money to artists, simply put. How that can happen with regards to streaming platforms and the relationship with artists and songwriters, the relationship between songwriters and major labels, and then new and alternative methods of income generation, perhaps based on new technology or new ways of artists connecting with fans, particularly in the age of coronavirus, where everything is up in the air. So perhaps we can start by talking about the state of play with songwriters and artists and streaming platforms and some practical solutions for moving forwards with them. You've both said in the past that you have nothing in general against streaming services as a concept. You just want musicians to be paid fairly. Now, so many years after Spotify and being the first major streaming platform and others have been founded, the ecosystem, the user base, the structure of the platforms is now incredibly well established and fine-tuned. And yet artists are, even after all that, still saying that the amount they're getting paid is really not enough for them. So first of all, perhaps I can ask you what you think of the state of that situation between payments coming from streaming platforms and artists in 2020. Zoë, let's perhaps start with you, because you've incredibly kindly, for all us journalists, released your streaming data every year for a number of years now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason why I did that was just to be a data point. I get kind of frustrated when I see journalists writing about this topic and they don't really seem to have any actual numbers that they really know. And so, and also that the music industry is really broad. It's not just major labels and huge artists. It's not, it's like, it's a big ecosystem. And there's a lot of artists like me who are in the middle, the kind of middle class. And I feel like we're actually really unknown. So from my perspective, not really that much has changed in all the years that I've been talking about it. I still feel like generally whenever I discuss this topic, there's a large percentage of people who say, "Shut up, you whiny artist." Or it used to be, "Get out there and tour, go out and tour, sell merch." And I am really, this is a terrible thing that's happening. But one tiny silver lining is that everybody can really see how, hey, wow, you've just taken away a large percentage of our artists' income. That thing that tech bros used to say to me, just tour, without taking into consideration the life circumstances of an artist, or that might only work if you're 21. Now people can see like, oh yeah, maybe this doesn't work. We need to come up with something. So I'm delighted to be able to talk about that and have that sort of those judgments kind of taken away. I still feel like there's not enough experimentation, and I have some hope around, the idea of the user-centric model, where the idea that a subscription fee goes to the musicians or the artists you actually listen to, rather than it being a popularity contest. I think the proof will be in the pudding of that one. We still don't really know, and I would like to see that. That's something I'd like to see developed more. And there was some, I guess Deezer had been doing a test bed on that in Europe, and I don't know what the outcome of that has been, or if it's frozen for now, or I would love to know what's happening there, because that feels like maybe that's something that could help. So
yeah, we can talk about that in a couple of minutes. Actually, that would be great. David, what do you? Thanks, Zoë. David, what do you see as with that in mind? Are we in a situation where change might actually, the kind of change you've been talking about might actually be able to happen? Do you feel positive at the moment?
Yeah, I do, because I mean, artists have generally kind of been distracted in a way by live touring, in that you, well, not pure songwriters, but songwriters who are also performers have been distracted by the fact that, yes, in sort of in the streaming era, you tour more, right? Or in the digital era, we started touring more, and that was kind of this. We sort of gave up some of our recorded music like we used to tour to sort of generate sales of music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your touring was kind of break even, and or you made a little bit of money, and the ticket prices were definitely a lot lower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the digital age, we slowly shifted where we started charging more for tickets, we started paying more, playing more shows, right? And this kind of distracted us, because in a way it seemed like we were making the same amount of money, perhaps more money. But like, I'm always skeptical about these kind of things. So, I looked at it, and really what I found was really, we didn't really make that much money touring, right? Net profit wise. There was a lot of revenue generated. It was a great way for your band, crew, management, those who are not royalty bearing part of the organization. It was a great way for them to get paid. But ultimately, as an artist, you didn't really make that much touring. So I'm kind of excited, in a way, sort of a perverse way, that we're now looking at what actual recorded music generates, and perhaps we can get back to a healthier, more sustainable system.
Right.
So,
well, that sort of neatly brings me on to my next question, and thank you for anticipating that. What is that fairer system? What does it look like for artists? Zoë, again, you've released all this data, and
Mm-hmm.
for instance, in 2019, you had just under 3.5 million streams, and that equated to approximately $15,000 in revenue, most of which went directly to you because you're a very independent artist.
Mm-hmm.
So what are those? What is that? If change could happen now, and we're in a moment where it might happen, what is that change like? And what can artists right now, as actual next steps, do to try and make that happen? Zoë, perhaps we'll start with you.
Well, I think one thing right now is to focus on strengthening the bond between the artist and their audience, having less middlemen, less people mediating that experience. And that's something that, artists are really good at connecting with people. And sometimes I feel like everything about the digital music industry is designed to sever that relationship so that other people can take some of the money.
Do you think that's deliberate? A deliberate severing?
I do, actually. I mean, I try not to be a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes I feel like that is deliberate. I think, it's only when pressured that services like Spotify have added ways for their users to connect with the artists. They want to keep the world, everybody inside their sandbox, and they don't want people to leave the ecosystem to go to me. And I think really the big focus right now, and this is what a lot of artists are thinking about with live streams, is how can I, make sure you're on my mailing list. I'm going to directly contact you. Maybe I'm going to ping you on an app to let you know I have a live stream, and here's how you can pay for it directly. Like, more ways to have frictionless contact between me and my audience. I feel like there's a bunch of services that are kind of springing up. And one thing I am enjoying is the sort of the Wild West feel of the live streaming world, and that it's kind of we're taking a prior medium format of video, and we're applying it to this situation. It doesn't quite work yet. And I've been enjoying watching what other artists are doing, trying to make it work, make this medium work for them. And there's a lot of different ways you can use it, or what service you stream to. And I always enjoy it when there's a lot of different experiments happening and there's no consolidation yet. I've felt the sense of dismay over the last few years as all the services have kind of consolidated into just a few. And that's when, number one, power starts being taken away from those on the bottom. And also it's sort of boring. So So this long-winded way that I don't think there is a way yet, but generally all the ways to build the connection between me and my audience without having a service mediating that experience.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Zoe. David, you've done it in a more direct way, or in that you helped take Spotify to court. But what the same question, really? You know, we are at this moment where, and the reason we're having this conversation is it does feel like change is sort of inevitable for everybody in the world in lots of different ways regards to money. But what can artists do, or should they be doing now?
Yeah, so I think Zoe's actually picking up on something here that I think is really important. I'm going to phrase it in a different way. Zoe's talking about, you know, the internet sort of promised that we would kind of disintermediate, you know, the transaction between like fans and artists, right? But really, the logic of the web was a little funny, because at first it worked, but you know, you didn't really want to have your credit card with 15 different websites, and you didn't really want to have, you know, to go to 15 different services to play music and stuff like that. So there's a logic with the internet where essentially it just wants one or two of everything, right? And we're really fighting that, right? So the ability to sort of disintermediate, again, like where we can kind of directly integrate, you know, or sort of, we can directly engage our fans and have economic transactions with them and stuff like that. We're going to have to figure out a way to do it whereby there's a platform, but a larger share of the revenue comes to us. And I don't mean to be a booster for one particular company, but a good example of this kind of new way of doing things is Bandcamp, where yes, it's a platform. They do take a fee. There's a lot of artists on there, but you set your own prices and the way that your music is released. So, and that's important. What I teach in a business school, so I'm always putting things in economics terms. So it's price discrimination, right? One of the things is some people want your music right away, and they'll pay to download it, right? And they'll pay a premium, like $20. I have an album on there right now where I have this, you know, and, you know, I've had a couple thousand people, you know, buy this album, which is nice, you know, and they can also stream it there once they buy it. And I suppose once that album has a certain age, I will put it on the other streaming services, right? So what I've done there is yes, I've windowed like the movie business. All I'm really doing is what the movie business did. Now, you know, my friend Martin Goldschmidt, who I've worked with for many, many years, and a lot of my records are distributed by him, thinks that this sort of windowing is a bad idea. I've never actually quite understood why he thinks that, but I do respect that a lot of labels feel that that's not right. But I'm telling you, it works for me. So what I'm getting at is that I think there's not a one size fits all solution here. And what we really need is like for 100 flowers to bloom, you know, we need 100 experiments going on. We need people trying different things to figure out a new way to monetize the music. Because really, frankly, since I released this album directly on Bandcamp and also a physical copy, which I sell directly, I haven't had an album pay for its recording costs in like 10 years. So this is interesting. It's working for me, right?
I would like to, you know, second what you were saying about Bandcamp. I always tell the story that I put my in 2010, I released an album on Bandcamp, and I had been working on it all during my pregnancy. And then I was trying to figure out, gosh, what should I do with this? How do I release music today? Because you have to reevaluate it every time you release an album. The world's changed every time. And so I remember I actually pressed go on my Bandcamp site while I was in those first 2 weeks, like nursing my son, you know, like, and immediately, suddenly I had income. It was immediate. And this time during the pandemic, I had a whole tour that was immediately canceled, and I was like, gosh, what am I going to do here? And I thought, well, I do have these live recordings that I did in November of last year from London, and I thought, well, why don't I had one of them as a live recording, and a friend of mine had made a live video to go along with it, and I sent out a message to my mailing list, and I also put it on Bandcamp. And the thing about Bandcamp, this goes back to talking about being able to contact your audience. One huge problem we have right now is like, how do you reach people when, Facebook makes it so you can no longer reach the followers in the audience
without
that you've
paying.
built.
Right. Yeah, you have to buy your own fans back.
Yeah, like you built that, right? You built all those fans, and now you have to pay to reach them. So that, this is like putting barriers. All these companies put barriers between me and my audience. And the most powerful thing is my mailing list and Bandcamp. Anybody who's purchased anything or subscribed, they get a message. So suddenly, 15,000 people got a message that I had, a new recording for sale. And I just made $5,000.
Right.
So like that's immediate and that's real. And so I feel like more things like Bandcamp, because there's still a big gap in the live streaming. Like I would like to be able to easily do live streams this way and release them to a set, without doing Patreon, which I have some issues with. So, but I feel like that's, again, just, it's an example of being direct.
Yeah, I mean, what you're both saying is that ownership of your own fans, in that sense. So the music industry has always been a series of gatekeepers, but now you're your own gatekeepers to your own fans.
Yeah, we have to take some of that back.
Yeah,
I mean, that's there's another thing too, though. Me and Zoe and I are established artists with large mailing lists, and that we've built up over the years, and so we can sort of do things differently. New artists, and I think it was always like this. Yeah, and this is the advice I give to my students, even though I'm the guy who sued Spotify. They say, "What should we do? What's the first thing we should do?" It's like, make an album, make physical copies, and put it on all the streaming services. And they're kind of surprised by this. And I'm like, well, when you first start, even in the days when I made albums, we gave away the first 1,500 albums. You know what I mean? We were always giving it away at first. I guess I'm just trying to say that there's not a one size fits all plan out there. And in some ways we fool ourselves into thinking that, streaming is that one size fits all, one price, flat price per month, when in actuality, different people will pay different things and jump through different hoops, depending on how engaged of a fan they are, and such. And we need to engage some of that more, right? Because we're leaving money on the table.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you just said one size fits all. And that's exactly the issue I've always had with Spotify. Their model is one size fits all for a particular kind of popularity contest. And we're way more diverse than that. And our fans are way more diverse. And, I want to capture out of the 10 people listening, one of them is going to really care and want everything, and the other 9 are going to might be casual listeners, and you need to be able to reach both of them. And you might reach them in different ways. So
we're talking about Spotify in this. I think we're using Spotify as shorthand for all the streaming platforms.
For all the streaming,
similar models, but I mean, I understand, and happy to do that. Let's talk about that then, because the business model of all the streaming platforms, with the exception of some experiments, as you mentioned, Zoe, from Deezer, but we don't know what the results are from that, are to sell the platform as the product. And what users of the platform get in return is access to everything as much as they want. And that is, I guess, at the crux of what you're saying, which is it doesn't deal with those hyper super fans who want to pay a premium and engage with the artist. It's for the sort of general streaming that we probably all do. Now, streaming platforms essentially value user time in the app as a priority. You can see with the recent Joe Rogan deal, he signed a $100 million deal licensing his podcasts, partly because he brings a huge audience, but also because he brings thousands and thousands of hours of audio, which will keep people on the platform.
And they don't have to pay royalties on the music.
Well, yes, that too. What, in that sense, what is can you make, if these platforms are built around that concept of a flat fee and everything in return, do artists have to look elsewhere? I'm not saying is Spotify, you know, a busted flush for them, but is there hope that the streaming platforms will operate differently?
I feel like there is. I feel like. Oh, sorry. I feel like there is some hope in there. You know, their Spotify artist area, which they you know, just did really in response to criticism. That could be refined because it's not all that it could be. So I do think there is something there. But actually, yes, I do think that we need the Twitches of the world to work for us. You know, like all that maybe this goes up to we were talking about blanket licensing before, that is there some way that we could build in something more fair that isn't just exploitative? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that is the question, isn't it? David, again, you sued them. What do you think?
Well, you know, here's another thing too. There's, you know, the streaming, just as music isn't sort of, there's not a one size fits all model for every different type of artist. I don't think all streaming platform either, because Spotify is actually somewhere in the middle as far as payments go. And if you listen to Spotify on the premium level instead on the ad supported level, it's usually about 8 times as much revenue goes towards the artists. So, you know, one thing that happens, everybody just listen on the premium model, but YouTube also, which is probably at least 40% of all music consumption.
Yeah.
The big gap here, value gap is I think what the industry is calling it now, is that YouTube plays so little. You know, depending on which part of their platform, it's as little as 1/20th of what you know we would normally see. So in some ways, we don't really know even really what the streaming economics look like, because you have this wild disparity between, say, what Apple Music pays and what YouTube pays, and it's a huge portion of the revenue. So I forget what the original question was.
But perhaps we can move it on to this. Do you think in some ways it's a distraction when we focus on each different platform's fraction of a penny that they pay per stream, and actually we should be looking at something else? We should be looking at how that money is divided in the first place and for what it is.
Well, yes and no, but the difference is so extreme between, say, a YouTube to Apple Music that we actually do have to focus on that. That is an issue that we need to fix, and I think those rates will probably come up in Europe, depending on what happens with the copyright directive. But yes, you know, the question is do those old 15 percentage points of wholesale to the artist in the old record, you know, business days when we were shipping around physical products to record stores and we had breakage and shoplifting and all this kind of stuff, right? Do those 15% royalty rates that we got, say, back in the 1990s in a physical product world, is that really fair for today's streaming world where you don't have physical products? Should we be paid a higher rate on that? Yeah, probably. Yes. So the division, you're talking about the division between the record labels and the artists. Yeah. I think that's part of the problem, and I think that should be something that we should address too.
Well, let's move on to that, which another neat segue. What about the relationship then between artists and labels in the streaming era? Major labels earn millions of dollars per day from streaming platforms. And that, as you said, a lot of artists are still on legacy contracts from a pre-streaming era, which complicates things. Are major labels simply not incentivized to change because of the contractual arrangements they've had and the amount of money they're making from them?
I feel like I can't speak to that because I've never had a major record contract. Oh, and by the way, there's a jackhammer outside my window, so I might mute and unmute myself. But you know, I feel like how record labels work is kind of a mystery to me, and I've just managed to make it work by being entirely almost outside in my own space. So I think David, yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me on that point then, is your recommendation to emerging artists to not engage with the label system and to sort of be patient and persevere their own way? Because as you said, you can push a button on Bandcamp and
Yeah.
later receive a reasonable income.
I think it depends on what your genre is. In some ways, like in my instrumental genre, it wasn't clear to me that a record label could give me the promotion that I would need to make their cut worthwhile. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think so that it's really like, it's whoever you work with is going to make your world bigger. And, one of the downsides of doing it yourself is you might not be growing as much as you could because you don't have that team behind you. But, it's a trade-off. So I think it depends on the artist. Some artists are very good at just getting themselves across. And I feel like they should actually focus on building an audience that loves them and supports them, that will kind of float them up to maybe to the next level when then they could work with the label to expand a little bit. Yeah. But other artists might be much better off with a record label. So I think again, it's not one size fits all. So
yeah, David, our major labels, they're happy at the moment. They're making $1 million a minute or something in an hour in income from streaming platforms. Is there a danger looming for them?
Well, yes, possibly, because if you're coming in later once an artist is popular, which seems to be the case, somebody goes viral on YouTube and then you come in later. What does that artist really need? What is the value add? Now, let's go back to 1988, I guess, when I put out my first major label record. Sorry, I'm that old. I was 12. The record company gave us like $150,000 advance to make a record. So we didn't have to take that from our touring income, They dictated how we spent it. And then they also probably spent another $150,000 making 3 videos, one of which got shown on MTV. But the exchange was like a 15% royalty rate rather than, 85% that you can get from going through a distributor. I think actually that was a good exchange, for us at that time. We had stuff that would get on the radio and things like that. I have a student that comes to me and they like paying basically pop country, right? They got some good hooky songs. They're like, well, should I do this myself or should I try to get a record deal? I was like, you should try to get a record deal. That's what labels do is, they develop pop country artists. So now I have another student who might play in a, sort of a math rock kind of progressive black metal band or something like that, right? They should put that record out themselves. There's not a lot of value add there for record labels. So again, it's not one size fits all. I do, though, think that labels signing artists after they've gone viral means they're probably paying a lot more for those artists. And the question of the value add is, it's questionable, right? So,
which in itself is a sort of indication that perhaps artists are being more independent for longer. They're holding on to what is theirs for longer, and that message is getting through. In that sense, talking about the relationship with fans again, do you think that, again, speaking in the sort of the context of what's happened with coronavirus and people have been connecting with artists on live streams, this Wild West that Zoe mentioned, do you think that fans having, there's a whole generation of fans who've grown up and consuming music involves a streaming platform. When you open it, either you pay per month or your parents pay per month, and you play whatever music you want, or you open YouTube and play it for free. And that has a very specific impact on how they understand the connection between them and the artist in a financial sense. Do you think that, perhaps Zoe, you might be as well a place to talk about this as an independent artist, do you think that the fans are becoming more aware now of that connection and what it means, whether it's through streaming or through merchandise, etc.? And do you think that they are sort of understanding that they have, for want of a better word, a specific responsibility towards artists and transferring money to them in exchange for the art?
I would say that when I first started out releasing music, and I released it myself on the internet, I realized early on that my job was to let people know that I was a real live person with no one representing me, because that was the Napster era, and I just had to educate my audience that if they like my music, they could support me, and it goes right to me, and it's not going to anyone in a suit, unless I wear a suit. But and so that was sort of, in a way, I started using social media and talking, and that was kind of what I was doing. It's like I'm just telling you how my life works. And I stopped doing that after a while. And I am doing it again now. And it wasn't a conscious thing, but I realized that, like you said, a lot of my audience are used to just sort of consuming my music wherever it is, and they haven't necessarily thought about it, like where it came from, or how I make a living and such. And there are a lot of people who are very shocked that I'm actually, I don't earn anything from YouTube.
Yeah. What do they say when you sort of explain this to them?
They ask this, they're like, oh, wow, where do I buy your music? Because there's a lot of, my listeners are broad, from like the older NPR crowd who will buy physical CDs, or maybe they even like it if I had cassettes. I don't know. And then there's the younger folk who might not even be familiar with the concept of going to a website, like going to a website.
App.
Yeah. They're like, well, where can I find your music? And I'm like, zoekeating.com. And so I've been doing almost like an education thing to just drive people towards my website, which is mostly Bandcamp, and saying, listen, this is where you can find me. If you sign up for my mailing list, anything that happens, I will tell you. As soon as I do live streams, I'll tell you. It'll be just us. It'll be just us together. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Zoe. What about you, David? I mean, the same question, really. Do you think that relationship is changing? We're talking about how we've talked about it from the artist side, that artists must own that connection. But from the other way, you have an extensive catalog. You're releasing new music. What are you hearing from the fans, and as they understand how money reaches you from them?
Right. Well, it's I pretty much have to second what Zoe said. Is I think for a while there, we just relied on the platforms. Until I was on a label until a couple of years ago. I mean, there's some stuff that I've released independently, but I was on a regular, big label until a few years ago. My last Cracker album is Concord, which is part of UMG now, right? So I was relying on them, even though we have a pretty good newsletter, which goes, I mean, it used to actually be a print newsletter that we used to do going back, into the 80s and the 90s. But yeah, I've sort of redoubled my efforts with the website, with our email list, with our SMS text messaging list, and other things to sell the stuff directly, to sort of engage this sort of windowing technique that I'm using right now with, this sort of solo project that I'm doing right now. So that's important. And I'm frustrated that, for instance, when I do go into Spotify or Apple Music or any things like that, I don't really have a way. I went into Spotify last week and looked at our number of listeners. I was actually really surprised. It was like 500,000. This is for Cracker, but that has a lot to do with the fact that Cracker has these recurrent hits that get added to these playlists. Streaming, if I had to look at it between my band Camper Van Beethoven and Cracker, streaming is financially not really that bad for Cracker. In fact, I would say it's almost a wash compared to the old system of buying, downloads, right? I make pretty good revenue from streaming on platforms like
I would say for
Spotify
me,
with Cracker. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that jackhammer. I noticed for me, because so much of my earnings were iTunes downloads, and for a long time iTunes was the sandbox for a lot of people, and if they wanted something they would just download it, and it became, I joked that I was paying my mortgage with it, because it was so regular and so constant, And that only really started to decline as streaming took over, like in the last couple of years.
That's my experience too.
Yeah.
But like I said, if somehow having recurrent songs that are like on the 90s playlist or alternative rock playlist or whatever, it's not so bad. Whereas it's devastating to Camper Van Beethoven and any sort of solo things. And later stuff I've done as Cracker, where we've gone off in an Americana direction, which is, a bit of more of a niche product and scene, right?
So in some ways is one way of looking at the system that you use streaming as a sort of the top of the funnel to bring people in to introduce them to the band to an artist's career, and then you try and win them over, and there is now an incentive and an understanding from fans that they say, okay, I want to support you, and that involves more than just playing your songs and passively consuming them on a streaming platform.
I feel like again, this is where each artist is different, and I think my funnel is slightly different in that I think a lot of people in the who become Zoë Keating fans, they find me through my music in the background of something. Whether it's on there's a podcast called On Being, or they hear me on NPR Morning Edition once a week, or they hear me on CBS Elementary, as the thinking music of the main character, and people go seek it out. And then there's the people who listen to me while they're working. And so, I'm on a playlist for best coding playlist, like the code is the playlist for writing code.
So it's your fault. Hey,
it is. I'm popular among among techies. So, but once they find me, then it's sort of my job because nobody else is out there educating fans about how do you support an artist? Should you?
In terms of then a sort of hybrid of that, of fans wanting to support artists and streaming platforms, what about user-centric payments? Which is this sort of, it's held up as a bit of a totem of an alternative that would work better, which means that all the money that I put in gets split only between the artists that I listen to on a platform, which is not the case at the moment. And people are surprised to hear that. First question, David, you mentioned earlier that I think that you think it might be something to try, or maybe it was you, Zoe, actually, I apologize. Well, let me put the question to you then, David, and come back to you, Zoe. Do you think it's a forward step solution? And if so, what's holding platforms back from implementing it?
I think platforms have an issue with it. Okay, well, first of all, I do think it's a step forward, because most people, if you ask them, when you stream something, does your money, if you get on, Apple Music, let's use Apple Music for a while, okay? That's just, if I get on Apple Music and I just listen to your music all month, my $9.99 or my $14.99 just all goes to you, right? And you tell them, no, it doesn't. They're confused by that. So first of all, I think it's a good idea in that it meets the consumer's expectations for what they are doing. Secondly, just in general, since we are still a market economy, it's kind of nice that the invisible hand, that money goes to where consumer demand is. I think that's just generally good for any economic ecosystem. It matches what people want. But more importantly, I feel like niche artists and middle-class artists, the mid-tier of artists, are the ones that are really struggling right now. And they tend to be the ones with the paid fans and sort of the super fans. And I think what you have here is not necessarily that the top artists are suffering in this. All artists aren't suffering in the streaming, the new streaming environment. What you have is the middle tier and the niche artists are suffering. And it's a little bit of it. Well, it's not really income in redistribution, but it's it's the money would go to the artists that need it the most, the ones that are creating more of the paid demand. So I'm generally for it. Did that make sense? Sorry,
yeah. And on that topic, do you think fans or subscribers of these platforms should be paying more? The price for Spotify hasn't risen for a long time. Do you think that they're used to paying $9.99, it's say in a lot of countries, for access to all music every month. Should that be doubled?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I
Good.
actually
Okay, we
think,
found debate. Okay.
I actually think no. I think that I think there's a lot of things that, you know, everybody's paying for every single service. You know, you're paying for Netflix, you're paying for your Amazon, you're paying for your, you know, Spotify, you're probably paying for, maybe you're paying for Pandora. And I think that I'd like to see it divided fairly by actually what you're listening to first, and then we'll see if it's more. But in that world, I feel like it's going to be really hard to ask people to pay more. But
I thought that as well, except for the fact that, like, for instance, many of the subscription video services have, in fact, partitioned their video. I don't know if it was AMC or FX or what I was looking at. There is still stuff that I get in FX, but I have to, I might be wrong about the particular app, but I have to pay more to get to their newest content. And I think something like that could work.
Got it.
That
like
there's
tier,
kind of
maybe
a tier.
More tiers. Yeah.
But that,
I mean,
you couldn't give the people what they have right now and just charge more for it. You'd have to go, all right, you get the first 2 weeks of music or something like that. But that's my opinion. Right.
Yeah. So it could be you spoke about windowing before, and
this does like windowing, So
you could say you pay a little bit of a premium per month to access music in the first 2 weeks of release or month of release,
like
and then or you pay the lower fee and access all catalog, etc.
Back in 2015, I had a bit of a kerfuffle with YouTube, where I took, you know, offense at their contract that they were essentially making me sign, because if I didn't sign it, then I couldn't participate in their scheme. And my music would be on there without my permission. So, but the main point was this: they wanted me to say, by participating with YouTube, I agree not to window, that I will forever release my content on YouTube at the same time that I release it on Bandcamp. And I said, that is absolutely outrageous. I won't do that, and it's not fair. And that was, you know, that was one of the reasons why I decided to leak their NDA contract, was because I felt like that's not right. And the only reason there's no sunshine on it is because it's wrong.
Right.
You know, so.
No, anyway. So that's an interesting thing. And while I don't know if that model works for everybody, it certainly should be, artists should be allowed to try it.
Yeah, and essentially what we're sort of reaching the sort of the culmination of the conversation, and what we're talking about essentially, I guess maybe as progress, like we've identified there's not really one clear.
We didn't get into this, like one thing didn't happen that got us into this. You know what I mean? Just we go back. I mean,
yeah.
I always say there's 17 things that got us into this, but I don't really know what those
are. Sort of, if you like, you're undoing a knot, and the knot has been built up over a long period of time, and there are lots of different elements to it that you need to address. But one of the things that we've spoken about a lot is the idea of giving artists the freedom to make more choices outside of this kind of black box system. Now, one of the things that when we spoke to one of the founders of the UK's Broken Record campaign, Tom Gray, who's a songwriter himself and has been a campaigner for better royalty rates for songwriters and artists, he said that if I said, what's your immediate next step? If you could, what should the industry do, you know, labels and streaming platforms and songwriters? And he said to get those people, maybe with sort of government insight, around a table and make new things happen, make change happen. Is that realistic, or is that even then too big a step in one go? What is the next step towards change is what I'm interested in, because I think a lot of people will be watching this and saying, okay, I want artists to get paid more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been another sort of thread through our entire conversation here, and that is knowledge and sunlight. And that David is doing this, I'm doing this, everyone I know is doing, like, we're educating people because we feel like the services, sometimes it's in their best interest to not have their users know how things work. And so one thing that I would love to see is, yes, discussions, sort of public ones in a way, about how things work now, how they could work, and what systems could we make that would be transparent. you know, the music industry is guilty of keeping things hidden as well.
Right.
You know, so you know, I always say that one thing about I'm able to release my data is because it's only me, and I'm not ashamed of it. And you know, I think in the music industry, a lot of people have a vested interest in appearing larger than you really are, because that's how deals work. You know, you have to seem really big so you can get a good deal. And I think the way forward is for transparency, as uncomfortable as that might be, across whatever kind of payment systems, or, you know, if there is blanket licensing of some kind in other
Which is
areas.
a sort of hard sell, isn't it? Because it kind of runs, as you said, counter to the way that the platforms and the music industry has historically worked. So is that, we'll come to you in a second, David, because I know you've got things to say about this.
I'm listening.
Okay. I mean, is this a case of, we've seen recently, for instance, social media platforms bowing to pressure and withdrawing corporations withdrawing advertising because they say they don't want their adverts running next to content that they and their users find, the people who buy their products find offensive. So is it almost like if you educate the people at the bottom, they put the pressure on the people in the middle, and something can happen?
Well, in a way, we're doing that because that's the only power we have. You know, we've been trying to, you know, for a long time, I've wanted the ability to control the kind of ads that appear on my YouTube content, but I have no control. And so it's like, you know, it's this sort of welling up as a result of world events that maybe is putting pressure on some companies to say like, hey, wait a minute, actually.
So if enough people say to Spotify, we want our money, that I want that 10 euros that I spend a month to go directly to, I only stream Zoe and David's music. I want €5 a month to go to each of them. But they would listen. Do you think?
It is like it's kind of, you know, it's akin to a protest in the street. You've got the protest in the street. Now what happens? What do we do next? So,
what do you think, David? What are the practical next steps that either should happen or could happen?
Well, I'm a bit more pessimistic on the crowd, just because they're, you know, a lot of music fans are actually kind of Jacobins, you know. They're just sort of like, these rich artists, you know, they're just making all this money. Yeah, take their money steal their music. You know, it's kind of funny. You know, I have people that are fans are like, you get way too much money, you know. They'll say that. It's like, I just steal your music because, you know, you already get paid enough, right? So I'm a little more pessimistic that consumers will rally around artists in this way. However, I mean, look at all the things like fair trade coffee, or, you know, we're a clothing maker and we don't use sweatshop labor. You know, we only make our clothing in these such and such countries, you know, stuff like that. It can be done. And I think we certainly should try it, to try to get consumers to write the streaming services. I was hoping there just another streaming service would come out that was oriented that way. I mean, in a way, Bandcamp is kind of becoming that.
But like a fair trade streaming service, you know, the artist-centric, artist-owned streaming service. There was some momentum around that, but you know.
Well, I just think that a lot of our fans are just, like I said, they're like, we don't want to pay anything. You guys are all rich. So I don't know. I don't know where that is, Joe. Honestly, I don't know if that is going to work or not.
Well, perhaps this is I mean, it's a complicated, like we've said all along, it's a complicated, multifaceted problem with multifaceted solutions.
It wouldn't hurt if we tried it.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt.
What about ongoing, David, as a you know, one way that a crowd of people, or whether it's small or large, can affect change is through legal action or through governmental pressure, regulation. Do you think that perhaps that is more realistic as a sort of starting point, because there's a structure there that will force streaming platforms to listen?
Zoe, did you want me to take that?
No, I was just, you know, you said government regulation, and immediately, you know, I just thought of like, that's so fraught in America. Maybe that just because government regulation, like regulation is made by lobbyists for the most powerful entities. So, but go ahead.
well, yeah, actually, that's my point is, we might actually have a window here right now, because I know the US government is trying to figure out a next round of the stimulus. And there's a fair number of musicians that I know who have, not only got unemployment, but I mean, it's possible that maybe we could have some sort of like stimulus to artists. Like if you're, just an extra category, it's like, hey, we'll match your streaming revenues, or we'll double your streaming revenues or something like that for 6 months. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. It's just as crazy as a friend of mine just applied for like a PPE loan and started a new company out of it. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. My issue, though, is that the long history in the United States with blanket licenses, whether they're the BMI and ASCAP blanket licenses, or they're the compulsory licenses, blanket licenses for mechanical royalties for songwriting, those processes were rapidly captured by industry players, and those rates were forced below, below what anybody would have agreed to in a market economy. And they were made unsustainable. So that is my caveat. It's like, yeah, maybe we could get the government coming with regulations and regulate our pay and stuff like that, but I'm worried that it'd be captured by the streaming service. Our mechanical rates were the same for 50 years at one point, right?
Well, perhaps we can end on a positive note.
Yeah, I know it's gloom and doom with me always. Come over for the.
That's okay.
I'm like the year zero guy. It's like we're at year zero now. We have to start over again.
I have something slightly positive, which is that everybody is aware that artists were like musical artists, performers. We were the first to lose our jobs, and we will be the last to go back.
Exactly. So that's why I think there's actually a chance for something here with some sort of subsidy.
And I think just a lot of people are unaware of the size of our industry, that like when we go on tour, we put a lot of people to work. People travel to see my shows, people stay in hotels, like restaurants. It's actually a huge economy, and it's not respected and not taken seriously. And we quickly give the airlines a bailout, but people would laugh at the idea of giving the entertainment industry a bailout. But wait a minute. So I think that like even the fact that everybody's across the industry is recognizing that you need to have a lobbyist. So like our booking agencies have formed an organization so that they can have a lobbying group in Washington. The independent venues have, so that they can have a say and have some power against all the venues that are run by Live Nation. And so it's like everybody's recognizing that you need to have a voice and we need to get a story out. So I feel like that's the positive thing right now, is that there is more awareness and more of an opportunity to get a story across that we need some change and some help.
The dream of the internet has been access to information, and it sort of feels like that fans who have been kept at arm's length through this process perhaps are being informed and are able to sort of add their weight to these things.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, that's perhaps a nice place to end it. It would be interesting to see. Obviously there's so much that we can't predict in the world at the moment, but it'd be interesting to see when perhaps the world has returned to, I hasten to say normal, but something less traumatic, how this all works out. So thank you both for your time. I'm very, very grateful. I'm with connections to fans in mind. Zoe, how can fans connect with you? And how should they do that?
Well, during this pandemic, I've become a professional email responder. And you can find me at zoekeating.com. My email address is up there. I reply. That's how you can find me. And my music is there. And I'm working on doing small, intimate live streams so that I can stay connected and have that feeling of connection. Because I feel like, I need money, but I need that feeling of connection with my audience more than anything. So
right, and the audience must love that direct response as well.
So far.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. And David, what about you?
DavidLoweryMusic.com. That's where I have my solo album right now. Or you could go to Bandcamp and stream or buy. And since this is an English program, but it's probably the only American song album that has a song that revolves around a Tracy Emin exhibit. The first song on the record called Frozen Sea. So go to Bandcamp and find my new solo album that I have up there.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for being part of this conversation. I'm still trying and hoping to get perhaps people from the streaming side to join this conversation as well. And if we do, maybe we can get one or two of you back to talk to them directly. But
okay, that'd be great. Yeah,
absolutely.
I hope so. But let's see if that happens. So, Zoë Keating, David Lowery, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.